It'll be our 19th year this year. So it's terribly bright in here, so I don't know how good some of these pictures are going to look, but we'll make the best of it. I'm going to go through a bunch of stuff. If you have any questions along the way, definitely don't be shy. So basically, I'm going to be talking about maintaining a reef tank for the long term for you and long term for your corals as well. I coined bonsai reef keeping many years ago. I've been reef keeping 31 years now. And a lot of our older tanks, we're constantly pruning them back, so we just kind of took the term bonsai and turned that into use within our reef tanks and culturing the corals and propagating them and pruning them, again, for long-term survival. We're on Long Island. You guys know where we are. We're out in Riverhead. I do like to do a number of things besides corals, even though they do occupy a big part of my life. I like to get to the beach as much as often. My dad taught me some wood carving. I don't know if this is going to work today with the speaker system or not. I'm going to skip this. Yeah. So with the building of the aquarium, for me it started out initially in 1991. This is some quick sketches that I did for Jimmy, who I co-founded the aquarium with. My two boys here are now 28 and 25. And so planning ahead is definitely something super crucial to the success of your reef tank long term. If you're doing everything properly from the beginning, it definitely makes things a lot easier. Back in 1991, this is me over here. This is Julian Sprung when he had really long hair and a lot of denim, I guess. So, but back in 91, this was really an entire lecture. There really wasn't much known about reef keeping back then. We talked about live rock and water flow and circulation, different types of lighting. Protein skimming was kind of even a new term. Chemical supplementation, trying to figure out what these corals do need to grow and prosper long term. And then controlling the algae was also a big concern. So this tank was at the New York Aquarium, where I was an aquarist for 8 years. This is a 180-gallon tank, and this was a really good tank. Still one of my favorite tanks from the time we were just starting to propagate corals. So it was a whole different ball game back then. Everything you see today that's out there did not exist as far as the species diversity and the colors and the different types of lighting. So I was really trying to figure things out from the ground up. So the reef tank out at the aquarium started out with, this is a quarried limestone base rock here. It's a 300 million year old limestone from Wisconsin, and it's about 150 pounds per cubic foot. So very dense, very heavy rock. And so the tank measures 30 feet long, 14 feet front to back, 6.5 feet deep, a little over 20,000 gallons. When this tank was built back in June of 2000, it was the largest reef tank in this hemisphere and the second largest reef tank in the world. And it held that title for about 7 years. Again, it's kind of bright in here. And that's the tank as it's progressed and grown in. A lot of the corals that were in there were placed in as small frags and have grown in through the years. They're 28 years old, and a lot of the acropores in there date back to actually 1993. Another favorite coral of mine is tubastria, or sun polyps. This is a non-photosynthetic coral. It needs lots of food. These were all sexually reproduced at the aquarium. These guys release planula, and you get those planula to settle out, and then you can glue them to frag plugs. But these guys need copious amounts of food for them to grow. So back to the west side of the tank in 2001, there's 30,000 pounds of quarried limestone rock in there with 10,000 pounds of live rock on top of that to keep everything going. The initial fish were yellow tangs and a bunch of other algae grazers, not super high demand fish that required a lot of food, trying to maintain algae control, especially in the beginning of a new system. This is the tank 1 year later, and you can see well, it's hard to see here, but there's a lot of little coral frags that have been glued in, just like we do today. And then this, I forget what year this was, but this is the same view of that tank. So even in 20,000 gallons, these tanks, corals get too large. Does become a problem as well for maintaining them. And again, we're looking to maintain them long term. Long term for me is not maintaining a reef tank for 2 or 3 years and saying that tank is awesome. It might be awesome, but that's not long term. Once you hit the 5-year mark and greater, that's what I consider kind of long term. So this is the west side in 2013. Some of these acros are in the for the raffle also. So these have grown in way too much, which is a great problem to have. This is a Stuber acropore. Just for some history, the Stuber acropore was the first acropore ever grown under human care. It was when reef keeping kind of first started, SPS corals were viewed as impossible to keep in captivity. And I come from a time when growing Aptasia and Valonia was cool. So I'm getting up there in my years. This coral back here, this Gorgonia is still there. That's about 28 years old. And so this Stuber acropore grew in Germany by Dietrich Stuber. And he gave a piece to Alf Nielsen in Norway. Once Alf Nielsen's coral grew, he gave a piece to Julian Sprung down in Florida. Once Julian's coral grew large enough, he sent me a piece. So it's a very well-traveled acropore. It dates back to, I believe, the late 70s. But you can see it's growing in. For water flow is starting to get affected. Other things are going to get shadowed because the corals above them are stealing the light. Water flow is getting blocked. There's a lot of issues and concerns as the corals grow too large. So after one of the dives, I went in and fragged out a bunch of the coral. Didn't know how much I wanted to do, so just do a little bit at a time, and then take a step back, take a look at the tank, realize I want to do more, and then fragged out a bunch more coral and then put starters back in there again. Transplanted a lot to other places in the tank. I send a bunch of corals out to other public aquariums as well. And so that's it's a never-ending chess match, really, is what your reef keeping is constantly doing. And this is kind of what the tank looks like now. I did about 60 hours of diving to redo kind of this whole section here. So that's growing back in again. When I was actually using my calcium reactors, you could crush up the coral skeletons, put them back into the calcium reactor, redissolve them, and grow your corals again. The thought of being able to do this when we first started reef keeping was, you wouldn't even think that this would be a situation that could come up, but it is. This is going to the east side now, so you can see the quarried limestone base rock here, and then just a skin of live rock over that. This is the tank 1 year later, and certain fish you're going to see in here. If you have questions about, can I do that fish, can I not? Don't just walk out of here saying, well, I saw that fish in Joe's tank, I can do that one also. There's specific reasons why I can do certain fish, and maybe you shouldn't try and do them at home. This is the east side growing in 2009. Again, the same issues as far as corals growing too large, overshadowing, affecting the water flow as well. So what worked in your first few years of reef keeping, if you maintain that same protocol over the subsequent years, it's a good chance that it will not work in subsequent years. So this side here, the corals were growing too large, and there's a lot of anxiety sometimes, and really worried about what you're going to do and how you're going to redo certain part of your tank. In this tank, it's large enough you can get in there with hammers and chisels and break corals apart. This stand of yellow turbinaria got really huge. A bunch was removed, lowered down. A lot of the live rock underneath was taken out. You don't realize how much undergrowth your corals are over time. So like the coral when it was first planted was here. So there's like 18 inches of dead skeleton underneath as the coral is growing. And this applies to any size tank. So to keep it interesting for yourself too, going in there and pruning out a section at a time, removing all that dead undergrowth, open that space up again for your corals. So this was before. This was after the first dive, opens things up, and now you can start to see the corals behind here. So like this is grown so tall that you can't see anything back here. And it's also coming way forward. So visually it starts making my eye twitch because I want it to look a certain way. This was after the first dive of about 4 hours. This was after the second dive. Again, you can see everything's been lowered down quite a bit, opened things up a little bit. It grew back in nicely. Again, it's that never-ending chess match. Here's a bunch there, and this is the Berger's acropore after Joe Berger here on Long Island. There's some frags of that in here. You can see how large this colony. So for perspective, that colony is about this big around, just for perspective. And there's a lot of really great anemones back here. And also now, visually, the tank is looking much smaller because all the corals are in your face and not allowing the view going through the entire tank. So here, some of it is pruned back, and you can start to see where things are going. All the tops here have been clipped off, and now you can see some of the anemones back there. And now the colony has healed up and is growing back in, but now there's a nice arch here, and then you can see all the anemones back there, and the tank looks bigger again. And again, this applies to your home tanks as well. You kind of lose track sometimes of like how much room you had. And I'm not a big fan of a bunch of tiny little corals in tanks. I like to see corals grow out, but then you do have to step in at some point and thin them down. Another way just to open up the view again is just cutting grooves. This is purple milka, and there's some of that in the raffle as well. This was a piece, half-inch fragment that Sanjay and I brought back from Belgium. Our friend Peter in Belgium had it. It was the first time it was brought back into this country. So now there's huge colonies of it in the tank, all started from a half-inch frag. So what I did was I just carved a groove through the center of the colony. This is looking down at it. So now the view from the front is over to your right. So then you can look through that groove and see other corals. And then maintaining space around. So this coral, this postal lepora, was taking the priority, but the stylos were going to outcompete it and kill it. So just cutting grooves and allowing your other corals to grow. Again, it's super, super important. So here's kind of a view now where visually this groove has been opened back up again. The Berger's acro has been clipped way back. I added some more rock work back here to extend the view. And here's some of the channels through the corals and around here. So again, it's kind of that bonsai maintaining a nice look of the tank. So here's where the stylo, that big purple milka stylo. So you can see probably maybe 15 or 20 little individual fragments, maybe a half-inch, planted on some of the live rock. There they are, starting to grow in, getting comfortable, and then those all fuse together. So you can take a small colony, a bunch of small pieces, put them in a spot, let them fuse together, and then you have a huge colony in less than a year. And they're applying this now to replanting the reefs out in the wild. And the corals, there's some feedback mechanism within them that once they feel, whatever it is, that they're big and larger, they can go reproductive sooner. So instead of just planting one frag and letting it grow and taking years, you can plant a bunch of small ones together. They fuse, they feel like they're a big massive colony, and can start spawning quicker. So again, this is something you can do on your home tank. If you have one acro that you really like and you want it to be a bigger colony, just fragment it, put a bunch in one area, let them grow together, and they'll fuse up. That's okay, you're good. And so here's the purple milka with the green stylo. Placing corals, the colors where they complement each other work very well. So the purple stylo by itself is nice, and the green stylo by itself is nice. Put the purple with the green, and they both make each other look so much better. This top, it's hard. So there's some rock work here that was added to that section, again, to extend the view of the tank. This was a big stylo that had grown in. So only the outer part of that coral is alive. The underneath is all dead old coral skeleton, and that's how reefs are built. It's kind of looking at old trees in a forest. All the undergrowth, the trees have died off. It's the upper parts that are alive. So I just pruned off the living parts of this stylo, took the skeleton, put it on the side, took it out of the tank, let it dry out, and just the skeleton weighed just shy of 50 pounds of coral growth. So again, that was taking up a lot of room in the tank and blocking a lot of the water flow. This is a section of the milka, so that's my foot there for scale, and these are 2-inch squares. Here's some extending that look of the tank. So when you're doing your tank, if you have a tank, and Rico, we were talking about this yesterday, about the width of your tank. You always want to go as wide as you can and go wider than you think you want. Because once you have the tank that's wider, then you can do a lot more decor, a lot more decoration, and you'll have longer term success as well. So I have 14 feet to play with front to back, so I added some more rock work and some shelving back here. It's actually just some plastic shelving from Home Depot to extend that look. Covered it with some live rock, and then that's the view now. So now there's a lot longer view there. And then here's that channel again, nice and open. The water is flowing through there again. The corals are much happier. Again, and it's all towards long-term success of the corals. So recently, I just took out all of this coral. It was growing too thick, too fast, which is a great problem to have. So this whole section is getting reworked right now. And that's kind of what would happen on a reef too. There'll be a natural progression. Big storms come through, break up the big corals, and then make them smaller. So why do corals die? That's a good question. So here's a pink Seriatopora bird's nest and an old Vargas acropora that dates back to '93. And here's another pink, what was a pink bird's nest. These are from the same frags. They're literally 8 inches apart, and this one decides to bleach out and die, and this one stays fine. I'd love to be able to tell you why. I don't know. And a few pieces survived, and I replanted them. And here's Julian and Raj giving me a hard time because the dead coral is right there. And they take no pity on me and are happy to shame me, thinking I knew what I was doing. But so some corals are going to die no matter what you do. They're alive. If it's not widespread, then don't sweat it too much. If you do see tissue recession, you can cut off the living parts. And you do want to check your water qualities, but sometimes they're alive and they die. And then you get sad sometimes, especially when they make fun of you, but that's okay. So I took a few of those pieces on the lower edge, and you'll often see in the stuff that's in the shadows survives, whatever the stress was. And then they were planted back in that same spot and grew again. So you tell me. Someone can tell me. I would love to know, because whether it was a bacterial thing or whatever, but that stress was removed. This was just something I thought was cool. A guy was taking pictures with these glass spheres in front of the tank and shooting through there. So this Flamingo tank here is this one here in the shot. So it was just a cool thing. I liked it. So it's in my talk. Here's a green Seriatopora. There's a piece of this in the thing, in the raffle. So normally there would have been a big groove here and this big Montipora here, totally blocking the view here and the water flow. So in with a dive, removing a lot of it and chopping up a bunch, and then putting back a relatively smaller piece. And here's this Montipora spongoides, which was initially planted, it's hard to see at this light, but was initially planted way down here. It plates out and then it grows verticals, and here is the next layer of plating, and then it grows verticals, and then it plates out again on top of itself, and then it grows verticals. And if I were to leave that, it would just, and again, you're looking at the succession of a reef being built. And this creates all great space for fish and things to hide. But again, now you can have that water flow and view. Yeah, here's a closer up shot of what I was just talking about. So pretty neat to see this happening in real time. This big green Titan acro, there's some frags of that, was planted initially down here and has been growing in through the years. And what I've been doing is just sculpting, and my dad taught me wood carving, so it's just neat to carve in a different medium. I'm carving in calcium carbonate instead of wood, but I've been carving and just sculpting the undergrowth as it grows up, making holes again for water flow, and otherwise this would just be a big ugly block here, and just my eye twitches and it's not good. So I'm in the midst of redoing the front ledge here of the reef now. This is the Marco slab rock. That's really nice. It's got a flat bottom cut to it, so it stacks nicely. So this will be redoing the front ledges. You want to keep the tank interesting for yourself as well. Here's another nice piece of Marco rock. This was for a private homeowner here on Long Island, a 15,000 gallon reef tank in his house. And this was some of the Marco rock that we were using for that display. It's one of my favorite rocks to work with for many reasons. This section looks beautiful, it looks great, but then this teal acro here, again, just growing tall, visually blocking everything that's going on back there. And here you can see the white part where everything was clipped and sculpted. So you want your corals growing for form and function as well. Again, this is for the long-term care. And this is this is Joe Caparata's son, Chase, and he was telling me that he was giving me the heads up on a coral, so I was listening very intently. So again, another avenue is cutting just grooves through corals, so you don't lose the magnitude and size of the corals, but cutting grooves through them works out pretty well sometimes, and it just creates a different effect. And then a lot of those pieces that were cut out of here, I placed horizontally down here, and they're going to grow out and then grow up again. So a lot of times when big storms come through, these bigger acropores, a lot of them get broken up, the fragments land at a good spot, and then they grow again. So the same thing happens in the tank here. Oh, I don't know why this is in the dog. So 2 years ago, I had a pulmonary embolism that almost took me out. That's there. Thankfully it didn't. It did kill a good part of my right lung, but apparently I learned that lungs grow back really well, like really fast. So that was good news. Yeah, I told him I'm not dead yet. But for quite a while I couldn't dive, so I ended up doing a lot of the pruning from the surface. This is the Burger acropore here. This one I didn't quite think ahead about what I was going to do with all the frags that I was taking out of. I don't know if you've ever seen the videos of the primates, and they get a whole bunch of apples and oranges, and they want to take them all. So they're like juggling them and like holding them, and one's in their mouth. And so this is kind of my primate version of a reef keeper. Didn't think it through. So this whole section here is being constantly reworked. So I was able to move a bunch of rock and then opened up some area for some more sand. You don't realize how some of this undergrowth, how thick it gets sometimes. These are stylophora skeletons. That's a quarter there. So you can see the diameter of those bases of that coral is super thick. That's a lot of calcium going into your system to maintain that. This is Bradley Cypress's tank, and he's in Nebraska, I believe. So he had a bunch, the same thing. I asked some hobbyists to send me some stuff in. So he had a big old seriatopore over here that was taking up a lot of space. You can see his hands here. I forget the size of his tank. Maybe a 180. Really does incredible with fish and the corals, and then he finally worked up the nerve to remove it, and then it opened up all this space in his tank again. So opening up the space, you get more real estate to buy new corals, right? So that's the other good thing. So you want to keep this interesting for yourself too. This is a long-term relationship. You need to do things every once in a while to spice it up a little bit. This is Mark Levinson's Reef Tank here. Again, beautiful as is, just spectacular. Big coral head, big Monte caps, big acros, and but again, encountering the same thing. Like he's got his flow and his water flow, but now you have all these walls going up that's blocking all that water flow. So it's like this gymnasium. If this door closes and the heat's on that side and air flows on that side, it's just not going to work. So the same thing is happening in your tank. So here's Mark and Dwayne lifting out. Dwayne's realizing he maybe shouldn't have gotten involved in this one, but and then here's the tank after reworking it. And again, nice and wide open again. Flow is great, water flow is good, lighting is getting down to where it needs to be. You can always transplant small pieces of what you took out back into the tank or just not. One of the other avenues I like to talk about with home tanks from a public aquarium perspective, I see tremendous home tanks that could look so much better with just a little bit of a public aquarium mentality as far as hiding your piping, taking care of your backgrounds, different things like that. Especially if it's a new tank setup, really concentrating on not showing all your pipes and filters and power heads and cords and things like that. You just want to look in and see your reef. So this is one of John Coppolino's quote-unquote smaller tanks. Kydex is a plastic insert that he has in his tank, so he took the cue from us public aquarists. So this is it dirty. And it's all coralline algae and stuff, and it looks okay. But this is the same tank with the Kydex clean. So it's like going from this to high def, right? Like everything has a clean outline to it. Everything is super defined. That Kydex, you just pull it out. You put it in a bath with muriatic acid, and muriatic acid is a very strong acid, so you want to follow all the safety precautions that come with it. Where you just put that muriatic acid, put this in like a swimming pool with some muriatic acid for a few minutes. I do recommend having two pieces of it, so you have a clean one, pull the dirty one out, then you can clean the other one at your leisure. But this is the same tank, almost the exact same angle, but look at the difference. Like it just, pow! There's no piping, and you get that definition of all the corals. Makes the tank look a lot better. So this is Kydex. There's a couple of brand names of the plastics, so it definitely is a nice thing to do in a tank. There's never not a reason to include this photo in any talk, no matter what's happening. So Charles Delbeck from, it used to be at Waikiki and is at Steinhardt, Richard Ross, Simon Garrett from the UK, and our little buddy Sanjay. So it's just, every time I need a cheer up, like when this just makes me laugh. I love this shot. So this is in front of the clownfish tank out at the aquarium. So fish management is still needed in a 20,000 gallon tank. Really want to be cognitive of what fish you're buying for your system. Again, we're talking long term. I did have a tang in this tank. I'm bringing them to the surface with some floating pellet. I've got my net there. And this tank, he could have lived his entire life in this tank. Here he comes up right here. There's the scoop. You'll see the super heavy, so he's coming up right in here, right there, coming up for the floating pellet. So this is a way of getting fish out of any size tank also. There was a few expletives after I dropped, so you'll see him splashing right down here. So have fun with your mistakes, because there he goes. I did catch him 4 hours later, so not the smartest fish, but and he now resides in the shark tank, and he's gotten even larger. But know how big your fish get. This is a huge bio load on the system. So I can take that fish out and I can put 100 anthias in and have a net zero as far as input on my filtration. So again, you can get the diversity of fish. So again, talking about the long-term success of your aquarium. So here's my boys. I forget what year this was, but this is Dan. He's now 28. James is 25. John is 18 and a little taller than me, and as third, big in the shoulder. So they worked with me. They helped me build the aquarium, and here they are working in the summer, doing the windows, keeping fingerprints off. So things happen over time. Corals grow, your kids grow. If I fed them the same amount now as I did back here, I wouldn't have a healthy kid. So same mentality of your tank. You've got your tank, you plant your corals, you're dosing X amount of whatever, and you keep dosing that same amount, but your corals are growing larger, and then you're wondering why your alkalinity is dropping and your pH is not where it is, and calcium. The demand is so much. I mean, the demand on an 18-year-old or a 16-year-old on food, like that refrigerator never closes. So just keeping that in mind as far as your tanks, and again, we're talking long-term success for your tanks. So you want to adjust your feed, your dosing, your lighting, your flow, everything around, because corals are just waiting to humble you. And the minute you start feeling really arrogant or cocky, they will humble you very, very quickly. Proper protein skimmers, protein skimming. This is a protein skimmer I built for the tank. It does 200 gallons per minute, is going through the protein skimmer. Oh, this was the picture Joe was asking about. So yeah, this started off as a 1-inch frag. This was a Stuber acropore that I was, it collapsed, so I had to remove it and put it somewhere else. This is the Magnificent Enemies. So these guys are reproducing. This guy decided they split by growing and then splitting off separate. So this guy decided to not only split on the front ledge, but then walk up the glass. So it was a really cool opportunity to watch an anemone split. There's a little bit of connective tissue still in here, but I did want to remove this guy off the glass. So I don't know if this video is going to work. Oop. Let's see. So I wasn't able to dive still when this was happening. So what do? You put a fillet knife on a longer pole. Again, a super sharp fillet knife, and just watch a little surgery from. So again, you can reproduce anemones too by fragmenting them and cutting them. This was just a little different. And complete. So, but you may be feeling this when you look at something like that. So, but there they are, and they're both fine. Actually, I think I sent this one out to Unique Corals at Joe Caparata's place there. Vodka dosing to your reef tank for nutrient control is another avenue. Again, we're talking long-term success for your tanks and minimizing detritus in your systems, minimizing nutrients. How to go about that? How to do those things? So just kind of being goofy with vodka dosing. Having the proper lighting. I've got about 26,000 watts of light above my tank, and there's a few LEDs now from MaxSpec, CoralView MaxSpec's up there. So eventually this tank will be all LEDs in some point, but maintaining your lights, maintaining everything. Again, we're talking long-term success. So there's the reflection of a 300 watt LED, 14K. Corals are responding really well to it. I also have 500 watt versions of that light. So if you do maintain your tanks really well and everything stays happy and the fish are well fed, there's nothing worse than a reef tank full of fish that are really skinny because people are worried about their nutrients. Either have fish and feed them or don't have fish. But if you feed them, then they can invest energies in reproduction. So that was a spawning of the Ginacanthus angel. And we collect the eggs. Dan Elefante's out here as well. He's got some great captive bred fish. And well, we were the first ones in the world to raise that species of fish from the egg. I can't remember which species of Ginacanthus it is at the moment. I'm not a fish guy. But it's pretty cool that we were the first ones to raise that from the egg. So record keeping, super important. Again, we're talking long term. I know there's a lot of digital stuff out there, but I do a lot of paperwork also. And of course, with all the technologies now and the redundancies and the layers of protection, you want your tank long term to be successful. You're concerned about power outages or pump failures or things like that. And using the technology is great, but not blindly relying on it is also super important. But to have the layers and layers that Apex can provide to you gives you that cushion of time to maybe catch something that's not working well, or if you're traveling or anything like that. So lots of great technology out there now to help secure your tank long term, but you don't want to be disconnected from your tank also because of the technology. I put right on my fixtures, I mean, you guys are dealing with LEDs, but I'm dealing with halides mostly, and the data I install on when I want to replace it. I don't need to go looking in a record book somewhere. It's right on my fixture. It's a visual reminder. You need to change that bulb, kind of thing. But LEDs are going to. They have to. It's probably a lot better than halides, but their light production is going to decrease over time. So that's something you're going to want to watch out for. And then why do some tanks not accept certain corals? If tanks that used to house certain corals can no longer keep them alive. This is the pink seriatopora, the bird's nest. For 14 years, I couldn't keep this coral in my tank. I could grow it everywhere else in the aquarium. Something within my tank was not allowing it to grow. So overall, I don't know. I will say the big change that I did during that time was going with the ESV, and Bob Stark is here with his co-workers, and I always say it's, wow, she's gonna kill me that I'm not remembering it. Victoria. I always think it's Valerie, and I know it's not, and then I get stuck. But Victoria is awesome, and her brother Ed. Thank you, Rico, for saving me. I'm still going to take a beating on that one, I'm sure. But so ESV is an iron manganese mix with a couple of other little goodies in there, and now I can grow pink bird's nest in my systems. So, but it also gets you thinking, like, why? Like, why? Especially if you've been growing a coral that's been growing really well, and then it crashes for whatever reason, and a lot of times you can't put that coral back in your tank. Another possible reason is Sanjay gremlins. So check your tanks at night to see what's going on. Because a lot of bad guys come out at night to mess with your tank. So check your tank at night for predators, sweeper tentacles. So it may not just be water quality. It may be sweeper tentacles coming out at night that you don't see at all during the day that are killing your coral a foot away. So watch for sweeper tentacles. This kind of does bring to the end, touching end to my talk. It's kind of like, can you hear me now? Can you feel me now? So that's pretty much it. Again, it's long term. We have an obligation to the animals that we do take charge of, and but also long term, we want to keep it interesting for ourselves. And you know, there's plenty of times that people just get out of the hobby for a little while because it's not fair to the person or the corals that you're trying to keep, but then you get back into it, which is fun. Doing those changes on your tank, resculpting it, just keep it interesting for yourself. Keep that relationship a little bit interesting, and it makes a big difference, especially when you do those renovations. You may get a little just kind of bored with your tank or something, and then you get into it again, and then you open space up, and it revitalizes you. And so, but that's all I got. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer. Yep.
What are your thoughts on quarantining new corals?
Quarantining new corals, great question. Yeah, there's so many topics to talk about, right? I mean, I have aquarium flatworms in this tank. They snuck in. I do manage them by hosing with fresh water. I would definitely, any acro or SPS definitely should be at least dipped. Revive works really well. There's a few other dips on the market. Some people are using Bayer. Thank you. I'm glad you're here, Rico. I need to keep you around a little more. So yeah, I would definitely dip any coral that's out there, even if they tell you it came from a clean tank. Dip it. You know, and if you dip it, the other thing too is a lot of the bad guys hang at the base of the coral. So if you're getting a coral that's on a frag plug or a thing, there's a really good thing sometimes that you just cut the coral off the frag, so you're dealing with 100% living tissue, because a lot of the aquarium flatworms and things will be at the base hidden, and that's where they'll lay their eggs. I'm convinced back in the early 90s we were dealing with aquarium flatworms. We weren't looking that close, we just didn't realize it, because we would call it base up. Like your acro, you'd base up, and if you had base up, that was like really bad. Tip down, something's going on, you could just frag the tip and it would grow back. But then we would take that acro and like frag it and plant it in another part of the tank, and that would grow really well. And it was just like, why? Like, is that bacterial? Is it water flow? So you're checking all these parameters. And then we used to take the epoxy stick, make epoxy Band-Aids, wrap the base of because we thought it was like a bacterial thing, and wrap the base and go like an inch or two into the live tissue of the coral, with these epoxy Band-Aids, and it would heal up, and then they would grow back over the. So in retrospect, after dealing with aqua-reading flatworms, we weren't looking close enough because they're new to science. They were discovered because of the hobby, so what we were doing at the time were we were burying the eggs with the epoxy and probably killing off most of the adults that are sitting down low. So they've been here forever, but definitely a quarantine is or at least a dip.
If you quarantine a separate tank, how long should it be for?
Yeah, I mean, if you're dealing with a Montipora and they have, the Montipora nudibranchs, there is no length. They're just so resilient, and you can dip for the living, but the eggs can resist dilute chlorine. So it's just like something like a Monty, I would definitely try and for at least a month, and really again cut away any old skeleton, because that's where the eggs are going to be, right at the perimeter of where the live tissue meets the skeleton. Cut into the good tissue, throw that other little piece out, and then do a series of dips also, and really look close. But the aqua-reading flatworms can be managed within a tank with blowing them off in fresh water or RO water, or even like a power head or something like that. But the bigger LPS and things, there's really not too much from what I've seen that comes in with them. But again, a quick dip in Revive or something is definitely a given. Like, I'm not worried about adding aqua-reading flatworms to my tank because they're in there already and there always will be. But if you can maintain their population low enough, your corals can do really well. So it's just like us. Like, there's all kinds of nasty stuff around us right now. We can get sick. If there's too many of a certain thing, we'll get sick, but we can easily handle lower densities. So as long as your densities are lower on your aqua-reading flatworms, the corals can withstand it. It's when they overpopulate, and then we don't have a natural predator technically for them yet. So, but yeah, I would definitely do like acros and stuff. I'm comfortable if there's no base to them. If you just do a good dip and you don't see anything fall off, I'd be comfortable with just putting them right in. But if you do have the luxury of even a tank that's attached to your tank or a quarantine tank, you can't go wrong with quarantining stuff. But yeah. Yep.
What do you feed your tubastria?
Tubastria get fed P.E. calenus, that's out now, P.E. mysis, Hikari mysis, and capelin eggs. So we feed capelin to our other animals, and so there'll be some females in the mix, and I can just strip the eggs from them. But there's a number of companies now that have the eggs on the market. There's lots of great foods out there now. I don't.
Do you get it 2-3 times a day? Or
it depends on the day, but those guys I try to, like if I'm walking by the tank and I can, like first thing in the morning they get a bunch of, there's also a good copepod from Gemco that works really well. So I'll usually give them a little bit of food in the morning to get them to open up. And then, so yeah, I have the luxury of maybe feeding them 2 or 3 times a day. And then that tank is attached to the main reef. So I basically have a 20,000 gallon sump. So then that food, whatever's not eaten, flows into the tank, and then the anthias are in their glory. But if you get, I just gave a couple pieces to Dan Riggle for him. But yeah, if you can get them a good feeding once a day, if they're healthy, then they're fine. A lot of times they come in, they haven't eaten in a long time, and they've lost a lot of body mass. So sometimes they won't even open up anymore, and they just slowly, no matter what you throw at them, they won't open up. So you want to start with a really healthy one and really feed the heck out of it. When you can put them into a smaller container within your tank too, and then just target feed them in a container. Get that. It's like fish in quarantine. Like they're a little bit thin, so you want to really pump them full of food. Once they get their body weight back, then you can go drop your food off, quantity wise. So, anything else? You good? Oh, yeah.
Kydex you're mentioning, is it expensive?
What's that?
The Kydex.
The plastic. No, it's pretty cheap. I'm sure with everything online right now. It usually comes in like a 4x8 sheet, You can get different thicknesses. You want to get one of the thinner pieces so that it is, you know, very, very bendable.
How does he attach that to the tank?
We just lips, like a lip around the top of the tank. So you just, it is, some of them do float a little bit. So you just, it's cut to fit the tank on the curve, and then you just slide it down, and then there's tabs on the top that just keep it from floating up.
And where can get behind it?
No, it's really snug on the, yeah, so it's really like right on the back wall. You know, if you have a flatter back tank, you might need to put a couple of rocks just to, but your rock work, you know, have your rock work off the back wall, and then you'll be able to slide that back in. But you can put little tabs or little clamps on the top, and I'm just thinking out of the box. Yeah, it really, like, yeah, it really makes a huge difference on the aesthetics of the tank. Yep. But yeah, just go online. I'm sure you know everything. I don't know of a supplier at the moment in my head, but Rico, you know.
I'm lost.
Oh, all right, come on, man. So, but yeah, and it comes in different colors, so you can do, you know, it can be bright blue, or you know, dark blue or black. I like the black because it kind of just fades to black, literally, and it gives you that cleaner line. So we're good. So yeah, if you guys I'm on Facebook. So yeah, if you guys want to track me down, if you're going to visit the aquarium, drop me a message, and be happy to show you around. We had some fun yesterday running behind the scenes. So that's the fun part of the job for me. So I'm always happy to show it. So thanks a lot for listening.